The first thing we're going to want to do is to install JetBrains IDE IntelliJ so that we can work with our Kotlin code on our development machine. Now the first thing to do is to open up your browser and search for IntelliJ. Here you should see a download link, and we can click on that to be taken directly to the download page. Now I'll be working on a Mac, but IntelliJ is available on Windows and Linux as well. You'll also notice here that there are two different versions of IntelliJ. There's the Ultimate Edition and the Community Edition. The Ultimate Edition has a lot more features than we need and is also a paid product. The Community Edition is supported for JVM development and Android development, so it's perfect for what we want to look at in this tutorial. When you're ready, go ahead and click the download button, and that should start the download. Once the download is complete, we'll get started on installing the IDE, and we'll take a look at Hello World in Kotlin. Now that our download's complete, we can go ahead and launch the installer. And on Mac, we'll drag the application into our Applications folder, which will start the install process here for us. Once the files have been transferred to your machine, we can go ahead and start IntelliJ for the first time to start the install process. In this case, we want to do a fresh install, so we'll click Do Not Import Settings and hit OK. Go ahead and accept the privacy policy, hit Continue. Now here you can choose your theme. I'll choose the dark theme. Go ahead with the standard IntelliJ key settings here. And we'll go ahead and click Next through to finish the setup process. And then we'll finally launch IntelliJ IDE Community Edition. The next thing that we want to do is create our first Kotlin project here in IntelliJ. So to do that, we'll click on Create New Project. Now over on the left side of this panel, we'll see a number of different project templates to choose from. Because we are going to be learning about Kotlin, we want to make sure that we have selected the Kotlin template. Now within this, there are a number of different Kotlin project types that we can choose from. The default here at the top is a Kotlin module for a JVM target. So this would be sort of a standard just Kotlin project that could target the JVM, nothing else added to it. Other examples would be Kotlin module for a JavaScript target, or a Kotlin native target, or an Android or iOS mobile target. So all of those are interesting, but more advanced. For this, we want to just stick with the basics. So we will make sure that we have selected Kotlin module for JVM target and go ahead and hit Next. Then we want to make sure that we name our project something meaningful. So in this case, let's call it Hello Kotlin. We'll make sure that our project location is set, and then we'll go ahead and select Finish. Now we have an empty Kotlin project. Let's start by adding our first Kotlin file so that we can write a simple Hello World example. So to do that, we'll come over here to the left, and here we have the project panel within IntelliJ. You'll see at the top we have our Hello Kotlin module. If we expand that, we can see that we have a source directory, but it's currently empty. Let's right-click on Source, go to New, and then Kotlin File or Class. And here we're going to type main for the name of our file, and then we will leave this as file so that we can create our main.kt file. Now we can get started by writing our main function here in our main.kt file. So to start, we'll type fun main, no parameters, and then we can type println parentheses hello Kotlin. And from there, you'll see now that we have this little green arrow. IntelliJ recognizes that this is an executable main function within this Hello Kotlin module. So we can actually go ahead and run this. We'll select Run main.kt. And that'll take a second to go ahead and build the project. And then we will get our output window here at the bottom, and you can see that we have Hello Kotlin. Now, one extra quick fun fact here, IntelliJ comes with a number of live templates built in. This means that you can type something and it will know how to complete that and auto-generate some code for us. So we can start typing main and then hit enter, and it will automatically generate a main function for us. And then we are free to fill in with our Hello Kotlin text. Awesome. You've just written your first program in Kotlin. Now let's dive in and start actually learning the language. To get started, let's look at how you can define variables in Kotlin. Now there's two types of variables in Kotlin. We can define mutable variables, which can have their values reassigned. Those are declared using the var keyword. Or we can define local read-only variables, which can have their value assigned only once. These are defined using the val keyword. So to define a variable, we can use the keyword of our choice. So in this case, we use val. Then we'll define the name. And then we need to indicate the type. In this case, I'll say of type string. And then you can use an equals, and then you can assign the value to this variable. So in this case, I've defined a variable called name of type string, and then I've assigned the string literal Nate to that variable. Now, like I mentioned, val are assign once variables, meaning this is read only once it has a value assigned to it. So if I try to update the name of this, we'll see that we get an error. That error says val cannot be reassigned. So this is our indicator that if we need to be able to update the value of our variable, we're not going to be able to use a val. Instead, we could use a var. Now, var variables can be reassigned as many times as you want. So as soon as I updated that keyword, now I can update the value of our name variable. And then if we want to use that variable, we could pass that in to the print function here. And if we then run our main function, we'll now see the output value of that variable at this time is blank because we'd reassigned it. If we remove that reassignment, we'll now see that we get this little underline saying variable is never modified and can actually be declared immutable instead using val. So this is nice that the IDE gives us that helpful hint. So in this case, we'll go back to a val. And now if we rerun this once again, we'll now see that my name was printed out to the console. In this example, we're using a local variable, meaning that the variable that we have defined is available locally within the current scope. So in this case, it's available only within the main function we have defined. Now in Kotlin, you can actually declare variables outside of any type of enclosing function or class. All you have to do is declare a variable within a Kotlin file. So in this case, we've moved our variable name outside of the main function into the main.kt file. Variables defined like this are referred to as top-level variables. And you see now that we've moved this outside of the main function, we can still run it, and our variable is still completely valid. Top-level variables can be worked with just like a local variable. So we can define an additional variable. This time we'll say var greeting of type string equals hello. We now have a publicly available top-level variable called greeting. So now if we wanted to come down here and print out a greeting before the name, we could do that by calling println and passing in greeting. We could also modify that greeting because this is a mutable variable. And if we then print out this new value, we will see that the message has changed. So when we hit run here, we should now see hello Nate and then hi Nate. Let's take a closer look at how variable types are defined. So when defining our variables, in both cases, we use either the val or var keyword, and then we have the variable name. Both of these are must-haves. Next up, we have the colon and then the type. So in this case, we have the type of string, and then we assign our value. One interesting difference between Java and Kotlin is that types in Kotlin are non-null by default. This means that there is a distinct difference between string and a nullable string. Now, what does this look like in practice? Well, in this case, because types are non-null by default, name is a non-null string. So if I try to assign a null value to this, we'll actually get an error, and it will hopefully say null cannot be a value of a non-null type string. So if you want to actually have null as a valid value for your variable, you need to add a question mark after that string value. This indicates that now name is a nullable string, and I can assign null, or I can go ahead and assign an actual value. So let's look at how we could use this with the greeting variable. So if we make greeting a nullable variable, we can come down here and we'll go ahead and print out the default greeting value, we'll print out the name, and then we'll see that we can modify the value of greeting to null. And then we can go ahead and print out these values once again. And we can then see that greeting has been updated, and when we try to print that out, it actually recognizes that it's null and prints that out to the console for us. So let's look at how we can actually simplify the declaration of our variables. I mentioned that val or var, as well as the name, are mandatory. However, Kotlin supports type inferences on variables and properties. What does this mean? Well, this means that Kotlin can recognize what type the value is that we're trying to assign to the variable. And if it can figure that out, we can actually omit the type declaration of the variable. So in this case, we could actually remove the colon and string, and the name variable will still be of type string. Now we can do the same for our greeting variable. So we can remove this, but if we come back down here and try to assign null to greeting, we'll get an error. Null cannot be a value of non-null type string. So why is this? Well, again, because types are non-null by default in Kotlin, and we are assigning a non-null string literal to greeting, the compiler infers that greeting is meant to be a non-null string. So if you want to have a nullable string, you might try and just assign null. However, we get a warning saying implicit nothing type. This is because greeting now cannot really be inferred. It doesn't know what it is a null type of. So in this case, we will need to go ahead and specify a nullable string. Now down here, we can assign null to greeting, or we could assign an actual greeting. Now that we've taken a look at how to create variables and how the type system works, let's introduce some basic control flow. And we'll do this by working with the nullable string variable of greeting. So let's go ahead and remove these values. Now let's say that we only want to print out the value of greeting if it's not null. So we could do that in a couple different ways. The first one we'll look at is using an if statement. If statements in Kotlin work very much the same way as in Java. So we'll use the if keyword, followed by parentheses. We'll use greeting. In this case, we want to say if greeting is not null, print it out. So we can say not equal to null, and we'll finish it off with curly braces. And then if we move our print statement within that if conditional, when we run this, we should now have no greeting printed out. And sure enough, we see that just the name is printed. And if we modify the value of greeting to be non-null and then rerun this, we'll now see that we have our greeting. Now, what if we wanted to add an else clause? So, just like Java, we could add an else. We can add curly braces again. And so here, we could define a default greeting of hi. So now, if we run this once again, greeting will be null. And so we should see the default hi value. Now, another means of control flow within Kotlin is the when statement. The when statement is very similar to a switch statement in Java. So to create that, we can come down and use the when keyword and then parentheses. We then want to pass into this the value that we want to check and switch on depending on its value. So in this case, we'll pass in greeting followed by curly braces. Now within this block, we can define each value that we want to act on differently. So in this case, we could say null, and then to define what action to take, we use an arrow, and then we'll say print line hi, and then we can define an else case here, and this will act as the default if none of the values above are matched. So in this case, we will print out the value of greeting on its own. So now, if we run this, we should see hi printed out because greeting is still null. And once again, if we update greeting to be some other value and rerun, we'll see that the else branch of the when statement is hit and we are printing out the value of greeting. So these are two of the basic ways in which you can manipulate control flow within Kotlin.